So, you're looking at a pregnant woman floating in a jar with her belly cut open so you can see the fetus inside. You look away, but now you're staring at a man who's been cut vertically in half, floating in a jar. You know they were both alive and fully conscious when it happened, and you know they felt everything until their last moment. Right now, you're in a room full of jars. Jars containing babies, children, pregnant women, and men, as well as their severed heads and limbs, just floating. You're 14 years old, by the way. Your teacher sent you here to serve your country. Section 1. Founding of Unit 731. Unit 731 was founded in 1936 by a man named Shiro Ishii. He wanted to advance Japan's biological and chemical warfare capabilities. Now, the Geneva Protocol had already prohibited the use of biological weapons during war, but that's precisely why Unit 731 was established, Japan seeing the ban on biological weapons as proof of their effectiveness in war. The facilities were located in Harbin, what is now eastern China, as a way to separate the Japanese island from the epidemic causing bioweapons they were developing, and because the location provided easy access to Chinese citizens who were seen as no-cost assets. The facilities had over 3,000 staff members and a dedicated prison capable of housing up to 600 prisoners at a time. It was all directed by General Shiro Ishii and was granted a decree for its expansion by the emperor. Now, obviously it all had to be kept a secret, so it became publicly known as the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department, Unit 731 for short. Epidemic prevention in the name was honestly just a sick joke, as we'll see later. Section 2. The victims. No one who entered Unit 731 ever left the facilities alive. Conservative estimates place the death toll inside the facilities at around 3,000 lives lost, while the bioweapons developed killed at least 200,000 people. However, a statement from one of the surgeons responsible for Vivisections suggested that at least 10,000 people were killed in the facilities, with him having vivisected at least 1,000 people himself. We'll look at what vivisections are in section 3 of this video. About 70% of the victims were Chinese. The other 30% mainly consisted of Russian soldiers, as well as people from several other countries, including Australia, Korea, India, New Zealand, and America, as well as several European countries. Many were simply civilians arrested on false charges before being hauled off to the testing facilities. Others were protesters spreading anti-Japanese rhetoric, and soldiers captured as prisoners of war. Not all prisoners were men, by the way. It was a distribution of men, women, many of whom were pregnant, and children. After being captured and taken to the Unit 731 facilities, these people underwent thorough health tests to determine their fitness for experimentation. Those who failed to meet the requirements were likely used as a literal target practice to determine the efficiency of different types of grenades, as well as other forms of weapons testing that we'll explore in more depth in section 3 of this video. The healthy prisoners were kept as healthy as possible until they were called up for experimentation. Victims also included staff members of Unit 731, with many staff members being subjected to experimentation after being infected with plague bacteria. Karma, I guess. Escape attempts were made, but were never successful due to the moat of electrified wire surrounding the facility, and a 3-meter tall brick wall, both of which most people never even saw. They were usually shot down first. Prisoners weren't referred to as people. Staff members jokingly referred to them as maruta, which is Japanese for logs, and the cells they were kept in were called log cabins. It was commonplace to hear a researcher say something like, "How many logs fell today?" when asking how many victims died. Some researchers published their experiments in peer-reviewed journals, claiming the experiments had been conducted on monkeys rather than human beings. Section 3. Experiments. Imagine you're 14 years old, you're a student, and you're standing face to face with a pregnant woman floating in a jar, with her belly cut open to reveal the fetus inside. You look away, but now the same thing is everywhere. A room full of adult-sized jars containing children, pregnant women, and men, as well as their severed heads and limbs in varying-sized containers, filled with formalin, a cadaver preservative. This is a situation that Hideo Shimizu, a 14-year-old kid, found himself in, along with other minors assigned to Unit 731. The true evil here, though, is in how these people died. Let's look at the 6 main ways victims were killed, as well as a longer list of various experiments they were subjected to. Before we do, I want to take this moment to pay my respects to the victims. This is a chilling, frightening story, one of inhumanity that we're about to recount. Viewer discretion is again strongly advised. Vivisection. Vivisection is when you dissect someone while they're fully conscious, without giving them any type of painkillers. You just wake them up, strap them to a table, and cut them open with a scalpel, then observe their organs while removing them, usually after placing a rag in their mouth to lower the noise of the screaming. This was one of the main experiments conducted in Unit 731. Researchers would infect victims with a disease, then vivisect the victims to study the effect the disease had in various organs. Other people had their limbs amputated to study blood loss. Just to study blood loss. People had their esophagus removed and reattached to their intestines in place of the stomach after it was removed. Some people just had parts of their organs removed, organs such as the brain, liver, and lungs. Ken Yuasa, an Imperial Army surgeon, claimed that most vivisections were practiced. An anonymous interview with a different staff member captures this procedure well. The following is a piece of what he said in the interview. The fellow knew it was over for him, so he didn't struggle when they led him into the room and tied him down. But when I picked up the scalpel, that's when he began screaming. I cut him open from the chest to the stomach, and he screamed terribly, and his face was all twisted in agony. He made this unimaginable sound. He was screaming so horribly, but then finally he stopped. This was all in a day's work for the surgeons, but it really left an impression on me because it was my first time. Biological warfare. Bubonic plague, anthrax, typhoid, paratyphoid, glanders, and dysentery. These were the 6 main pathogens employed to cause widespread epidemics and widespread death, claiming hundreds of thousands of Chinese victims. 45 kilograms of fleas were infected with 300 kilograms of plague. Every month, they were then placed in biodegradable bombs, which were released from low-flying aircrafts and detonated when close to the ground to protect the fleas inside. The fleas then spread the plague, killing tens of thousands of people. Rats and birds carrying anthrax were dispersed onto Chinese land in the same way. Typhoid was released into wells and marshes, and cholera-infected food and clothing was dropped in aid packages from aircrafts down to the survivors. Tens of thousands of the Japanese military were also killed while distributing these pathogens. Most of these casualties happened due to cholera, adding to the hundreds of thousands of deaths they caused. Biological warfare proved so effective that the army had prepared aircrafts containing bubonic plague, cholera, and typhoid to be deployed to the United States West Coast, along with suicide runners who would infect themselves before running ashore from submarines. However, that plan was scrapped as government officials feared that even if they won the ensuing conflict with the US, the rest of the world would forever hold Japan in contempt for the bacteria it would unleash on the world. Weapons testing. People were strapped to wooden poles and placed at varying distances from grenade explosions to test the effective blast radius. Others were used to test the effectiveness of different amounts of shrapnel fragments and shrapnel bombs. Some people were simply stabbed so surgeons could determine the best course of treatment in combat environments. Others were equipped with gas masks and sent out naked before they were all subjected to chemical explosions like mustard gas or chlorine gas. Frostbite testing. Hisato Yoshimura, an army engineer referred to as a scientific devil and a cold-blooded animal by his peers, would put naked prisoners out into the freezing cold and film them until they died. He would also soak the fingers of babies, some as young as 3 days old, in ice water containing salt, which lowers the temperature of ice. He would also place one limb through an opening in the wall into the outside air, and when the limb froze, it would be smashed with a short stick, quote, emitting a sound resembling that which a board gives when it is struck. He also collected data on the extensiveness of frostbite after different periods of undernourishment, as well as what effect different diets had on frostbite in people. Recordings of his findings were kept by the US government. A man and a woman, one person containing syphilis and the other not, would be forced into sex, with death by shooting being the alternative. Just so you know, for every experiment, death by shooting was always the alternative. After contracting syphilis, victims were then vivisected at different stages of the disease's progression to monitor its effects on internal and external organs. Female victims are often blamed by the guards as being the carriers of the STD, despite it being forced on them. Female prisoners with syphilis were derogatorily referred to as jam-filled buns. Very few children grew up in the facility, and some of those who did had to grow up with syphilis. It is assumed, however, that most children were killed after birth or aborted before they were born. Women in the facility were also subjected to sex crimes, as shown by the following testimony of a unit member. One of the former researchers I located told me that one day he had a human experiment scheduled, but there was still time to kill. So he and another unit member took the keys to the cells and opened one that housed a Chinese woman. One of the unit members raped her. The other member took the keys and opened another cell. There was a Chinese woman in there who had been used in a frostbite experiment. She had several fingers missing and her bones were black, with gangrene set in. He was about to rape her anyway. Then he saw that her sex organ was festering, with pus oozing to the surface. He gave up the idea, left and locked the door, then later went on to his experimental work. Other experiments. Unit members infected by the bubonic plague they were developing were sometimes vivisected as well. The following testimony is from Yoshio Tamura, an assistant in the special team, which was headed by Shiro Ishii's brother. The special team was ordered to vivisect Yoshio Sudo, an employee infected with the plague. Quote, Sudo had, a few days previously, been interested in talking about women, but now he was thin as a rake, with many purple spots over his body. A large area of scratches on his chest were bleeding. He painfully cried and breathed with difficulty. I sanitized his whole body with disinfectant. Whenever he moved, a rope around his neck tightened. After Sudo's body was carefully checked by the surgeon, I handed a scalpel to the surgeon, who, reversely gripping the scalpel, touched Sudo's stomach skin and sliced downwards. Sudo shouted "brute" and died with this last word. Other experiments included food and water deprivation to determine the amount of time until death, placement in low-pressure chambers until victims' eyes popped out of their sockets, being hung upside down until death, crushing with heavy objects, electrocution, dehydration with hot fans, where corpses would weigh 20% their original weight, placement in centrifuges and being spun until death, injection with animal blood, exposure to lethal amounts of X-rays, exposure to varying gases inside gas chambers, injection with seawater, being burned alive, being buried alive, exposure to pufferfish poison, heroin, castor oil seeds, extreme bloodletting, and exposure to cyanic acid gas. A unit member reported seeing a Western man cut vertically in half and pickled in a jar of formaldehyde. A test was conducted where the time it took for 3-day-old babies to freeze to death was recorded. Many tests simply had no possible military application and only served the purpose of satiating someone's curiosity. Section 4. End of Unit 731. Towards the end of World War II, the Japanese government saw that they were on the losing side, so they knew they had some covering up to do. They went on a rapid and thorough bid to eradicate all evidence of their atrocities. First, they gave the prisoners in the Unit 731 facilities rope and led them to hang themselves, through suggestion. Those who refused were injected with potassium cyanide forcefully, and every single corpse was incinerated. The buildings in the facility were destroyed using explosives. Potassium cyanide was then given to staff members who were instructed to take it upon capture. Less than 20 members of the operation were eventually forced to serve time. None served more than 7 years for their crimes, with many serving between 3 and 5 years. None were convicted by the United States because the US gave immunity to everyone involved in exchange for the data they collected. In a sick twist of events, the data collected by Unit 731 proved mostly useless. The Japanese had far less advanced fundamental scientific knowledge and scientific equipment. A vast majority of the biological weapons research and experiment data paled in comparison to what the US already had for themselves, which rendered a grand majority of the suffering caused pointless, as well as evil and traumatic in its existence alone. It's also widely accepted that the Soviets offered leniency as well, in exchange for some of the data collected. The Japanese government spent several decades denying its guilt, while removing any mention or reference to Unit 731 from school textbooks. Attempts were made to put class action lawsuits into motion against the government for its role in the atrocities committed, but case after case was thrown out due to a claimed lack of sufficient evidence. It wasn't until August 2002 that the Tokyo District Court ruled for the first time that Japan had engaged in biological warfare, though many of the perpetrators had already lived their lives, even sharing their findings with the medical society. Their involvement in Unit 731, for the most part, was an open secret. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you next time.